Hello, just a quick edit before you start the video. If you've already seen the introduction from any of the previous videos in this series, then skip ahead to whatever the time on the screen says. If you haven't, there will be a slightly different audio in the introduction as I recorded that before I got my microphone.
The core set for Smash Up released in October 2012 and currently sits in the top 1000 board games of all time on BoardGameGeek. To this day, the core set continues to provide some of the most iconic and powerful cards and factions that have ever been printed, but it also provides some of the weakest. In this series, I'm going to be taking a look at some of the core set factions with the knowledge of what we know now and how the game has developed, just to buff and nerf some of these cards. Since October 2012 to the time of this video's recording, 66 further factions have released via 13 mainline expansions, as well as 4 promotional factions and the Munchkin set. That makes for close to 3,000 possible faction combinations. So why look at the core set again? You have to remember that if we're thinking about buying Smash Up, the core set will be most new players' first purchase and experience of the game. These 8 factions are likely to be the oldest factions most people have in their collection. That means it's important to get them right, as it is the springboard into other expansions. You may not know it, but the core set also sets a rough parameter for the power level of the game. Because Smash Up isn't a game like Pokemon or Magic the Gathering that has various formats where older sets rotate out of standard play, that means everything that's printed after the core set has to ensure that the core set retains viability in the overall metagame. You can't power creep to the extent that older factions become unplayable, and customers quite rightly are disgruntled that money they've spent on the core set is then wasted. That's partly why you have this extreme in the core sets of some very good factions even to this day, and some very bad factions as well. Because a general range of power level was set, future releases roughly have to stay within that range. The second, third and fourth points generally tie in together, so I'll go over them quickly. When I say context of the time, the world of Smash Up may only have been 8 or 12 factions big, maybe a little bit more depending on how far ahead they were designing the game. They couldn't possibly know at that point how big the game would get and just how many factions would actually be in the game. I generally think the game is balanced extremely well. They've done an incredible job of maintaining a fairly similar power level throughout the expansions, and a good example to highlight this point would be draw power. If you look at the core set factions, draw power is extremely scarce. Draw power was considered a powerful mechanic, so they made it the identity of one of the factions, the Wizards. However, with all subsequent expansion releases, they massively, and I mean massively, increased the amount of draw power in the game, to the point now where most factions have some way of drawing or searching for cards in their deck. They've made that design decision that draw power is what makes a card game fast, interesting, exciting, and as a result the core factions have all suffered because of it, but it's something they might not necessarily have known at the time. As more factions have been released, we've seen plenty of new keywords as well as a new card type in the Titans. There are certainly 1 or 2 cards in the core set that would benefit from the addition of some of the more common keywords, as well as recognising the game isn't just limited to minions and actions anymore. Finally, we have power creep. I did mention I think the game has been very well balanced, all things considered. However, it is inevitable that with more than 70 factions over 7 years, there will be a general upward curve in the power level of the game. This is done in a competitive trading card game just to drive sales essentially, but once you start a power creep, it is very difficult to stop it. In Smash Up there are certainly cards that are so far above or below the average power level that they really need to be addressed. Also, we saw an acknowledgement of power creep in the game with the release of the Titan event kit. Titans were given to those factions considered to be weaker. I'm not sure how that assessment was made, as I think there were some clear misses, to give them a little power boost and make them more competitive in the overall metagame.
This time I'm taking a look at the ninjas, and specifically Ninja Acolyte, Infiltrate and Smoke Bomb. Just a reminder of my approach, it's important to change only what needs to be changed. What doesn't fit well in the faction, where is the theme slightly off, what hasn't aged well, what is too strong or too weak. We're not redesigning the faction, just adjusting those cards that need to be changed. Second, it's important to remain true to the identity of the faction. Ninjas are about surprises from hand, aka the specials, destruction and then tricky disruptive effects. Putting in a load of power gain or discard interaction wouldn't really be true to the identity of the ninjas. First, let's take a look at Infiltrate. This card needs to be changed anyway, as it has been errated. While that would be sufficient, I actually think this card is just far too weak and very underwhelming and situational for one of the duplicate action slots in the ninjas. It can destroy any other action on a base, and then you may ignore the base's ability until the start of your next turn. There are so many times where I draw into this card and it's just completely useless because either there are no actions on bases in play, or none of the abilities on the bases are ones that I would want to ignore, or both. Just looking in the core set, in the other 7 factions, 4 of them have just 9 play on base actions out of a possible 62 action slots. 3 of those 4 factions only have 1 action, and 1 of those 3 actions only lasts for 1 turn. Now there were more factions released in expansions such as Steampunks, Killer Plants, Truckers, Kaiju and so on, that brought more play on base actions into the game. However, it's still not commonplace enough to the point where 2 copies of this action aren't regularly dead in your hand. On the other side of the effect, the base's ability, again in the core set there was just one base, Evan City Cemetery, where you might actually want to consider ignoring the base's ability if it were to break and you were the winner. But even then, drawing a new hand of 5 cards might actually be quite good for you at the time. Now obviously I've only looked at the core set here to consider both of these effects, but the release of future expansions didn't drastically change the power level of this card. Generally most bases you don't want to ignore the effect, and as I've mentioned, most factions released either don't have play on base actions, or they have 1 or 2. My proposed solution would be to retain the first effect, but to add the ongoing effect that all of the players ignore this base's ability, as well as you may ignore this base's ability until the start of your next turn. This effect has been done before, and it's also different enough to Jam Signal, which was also in the core set, because Infiltrate is a 1-turn effect. As the name suggests, you infiltrate, cause some disruption, and then you're gone. I don't think this is too oppressive, because generally not having a base's ability for 1 turn wouldn't be too detrimental, but it can put a slight dent or delay to a certain faction's exploiting of a base's ability. It can also act like a stasis field for certain bases. Imagine playing against the robots or the zombies and Rhodes Plaza Mall or Factory 4361337 are in play, and you play down an Infiltrate. Any plans they had to break the base on their next turn might just have to be put on hold. I think most importantly this actually makes the card playable every single time you draw it, rather than now where it's often the worst card in your hand. Now we're going to take a look at possibly one of the worst cards in Smash Up. Can you honestly say you've ever drawn into Smoke Bomb and thought this was the exact card you needed right now? Most often the sight of Smoke Bomb is just met with a sigh. The card truly is just that bad, and I'd argue that the flavour of the card doesn't really correspond to the name. When you think of ninjas and smoke bombs, when the smoke clears they've gone. They use it as a diversionary tactic to help them reposition or escape from danger. The smoke itself doesn't provide any actual protection. When I was thinking about what I could do with this card, the most directly comparable card was Hang In There from the Kitty Cats, which I'd argue is actually a more thematic card from the ninjas than Smoke Bomb is. I was also thinking about the ninja's speciality, which is plays in phase 3, and making this a usable card in the play cards phase as well as in phase 3. You Call This Archaeology was initially what I was thinking, but ninjas already have Way of Deception, which is a movement card, and doing a similar effect but also adding a phase 3 element to it really power creeps Way of Deception like crazy. So then I was thinking, what about making it an exclusively phase 3 card, something like Someday My Prince Will Come, and another phase 3 special for the ninjas to go alongside Hidden Ninja. Ultimately, I settled with the following 2 options. Option 1, if you want to retain the intent of the original card as a protection effect, I remove the 1-turn duration of the card but soften the ability to provide a 1-time protection from the effect of another player's actions. Importantly though, I added the flavour of movement, symbolising using a smoke bomb to escape. The second possibility was that phase 3 special that I just mentioned. While I like the flavour of the card and how well it fits with the identity of the ninjas and their strengths, with the shinobis and the hidden ninja, there might just be too many cards that you would hold in hand and don't play. It risks the faction becoming clunky, so I would go with option 1 on this one. Onto the Ninja Acolyte now. When I first started playing and learning Smash Up, I actually found this card to be quite confusing to understand. The special tag was definitely confusing because, especially in ninjas, I associated specials with being able to play them when bases were breaking. There was also something about the way the card was worded I associated with the start of the turn rather than the play cards phase. It can also create some bizarre situations where if for some unknown reasons you're playing Ninja Killer Plants and you sprout to play a Water Lily at the start of the turn, you can still use the Ninja Acolyte's ability because extra minions played at the start of the turn don't count against this ability, which I find very confusing even now. My 3 possible solutions are as follows. The first one, which applies to all of them, is very simply a keyword change from special to ongoing. This just helps to apply keywords consistently, as Ninja Acolyte fits the description for ongoing, which is an ability that is active while the card is in play, and the Ninja Acolyte ability can only be active while the card is in play. Specials to me are about cards that can be played in phase 3, or abilities that trigger in phase 3, or abilities that trigger when the card is not in play. The mix-up with ongoing, as it applies to the Buccaneer as well for the Pirates, was probably just a legacy from the core set, before they refined and fine-tuned abilities and keywords. The second solution would be to retime the minion to trigger at the start of your turn. We've seen this effect before in cards like the Sprout and the Mild-Mannered Citizen. I actually think this makes the card's ability less confusing. I've also stated in the ability that a non-Ninja Acolyte minion must be played instead. We've seen minions named in abilities before, in the Gelf for instance, but also on most of the Grimm's Fairy Tale minions. Notice as well that the conditionality of not having played a minion yet is removed. With this ability, if you have 4 Ninja Acolytes in play, you can trigger all 4 abilities so long as you have 4 non-Ninja Acolyte minions in hand. I actually think this is fine because it's minions from hand, rather than the deck, for instance like the Sprout, it's going to be much harder to have 4 alternative minions in hand to actually fully maximise the acolytes. If you're worried that this might be too strong though, I've included a third option which again puts the timing at the start of the turn, but this time I've retained the core card's ability but added a conditionality clause onto the end to prevent multiple acolytes from being used each turn. We've seen this sort of conditionality before if you look at the end of each of these abilities for instance. While the second solution is my preference, the safest pick is probably solution 3. So just as a reminder, Infiltrate incorporates the errata wording, but also now means that all other players ignore the base's ability for one turn. Ninja Acolyte's keyword has changed to ongoing, it now triggers at the start of your turn, and you can only use one Ninja Acolyte ability each turn. Smoke Bomb has removed the single turn duration, it now only protects from the effects of one other player's action on it, and the minion is moved to another base when this happens, and Smoke Bomb is destroyed instead. So what do you think of these changes? What would you have changed instead? Did the ninjas even need to be changed? Let me know down in the comments, and with that being said, I will see you all next time. Goodbye.